The first time I ever wrote the Footprints in the Sand poem, I can remember the very last line. It is the Lord was whispering. It brought to me.
The important thing to never stop questioning. The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. Albert Einstein. Our knowledge has its origins in our perception. Leonardo da Vinci. Every art should become science. Every science should become art. Heinrich von
Footprints in the Sand is one of the famous poems. We heard it by popular song, we seen it in books and posters. Did you know that lots of copy prints and claim this immortal work of poetry and some of copies only anonymous author? Who really wrote this poem? And it was awarded to her 48 years after she was written. Footprints in the Sand has been seen in print by people the world over since the late 1940s. All that time no author has been credited with this immortal work, only author anonymous has appeared at the bottom. This popular text is based in Christian beliefs and describes an experience in which a person is walking on a beach with God. They leave two sets of footprints in the sand. The tracks represent stages of the speaker's life. The two trails dwindle to one, especially at the lowest and most hopeless moments of the person's life. When questioning God, believing that the Lord must have abandoned his love during those times, God gives the explanation. During your times of trial and suffering, when you see only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. For many years handwritten copies were distributed by Mary to those who needed something to give them comfort at a low point in their lives. It was some time after this that friends of Mary saw it in print and wondered why she wasn't given credit for writing it. An attorney at that time told her that it would be very hard to prove her the author since it had been used by many publishers of religious materials and greeting cards. Mary wrote Footprints in 1936 when she was very young and knew nothing of copywriting. Discouraged, she didn't pursue it any further. Mary's story. Mary was born November 8, 1922 in the Philadelphia suburb of Chester, Pennsylvania. She had many brothers and sisters, but was still able to maintain her individuality and strong-headedness. This became even more difficult after the loss of her mother at age 6, which forced her father to raise all 8 children by himself. Most of her childhood was spent during one of this nation's toughest and most trying times, the Great Depression. It was in her early teens when she first wrote Footprints in the Sand, having been inspired by the many things that had affected her young life. She was so moved by the power of the words she wrote that she felt the need to share its meaning with those who could gain strength from it in their time of need. At age 16, she got into an abusive marriage that resulted in her flight and finding refuge on an Indian reservation outside of Claremore, Oklahoma with her infant son. She was able to return home after getting word that her husband had gone off to fight in World War II. During his absence, she was forced to support herself by working at Philadelphia's Troc as a stage performer and dancer. Because of this, her husband was able to take their son away from her upon his return from the war, using his influence with local officials. She spent many years trying to get her son back. Mary eventually moved to Los Angeles in the late 40s, where she met her future husband Basil Zangier, whom she referred to as the love of her life. It was at this time that she first saw footprints in the sand in print, with author anonymous as the only credit. Several attorneys discouraged her from pursuing her claim to it for lack of proof. But her greatest battle was with polio and the accident that almost took Basil from her. In 1959, the year after her second son Basil Jr. was born, the family moved to Orange County, just southeast of Los Angeles. Over the years, Mary kept herself busy as a nurse and working in the community, volunteering for many activities. She was recognized many times for her work, including Fight Mamas, which she organized to send personal supplies and home-baked items to servicemen stationed in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. In January 1980, she lost her husband Basil in his battle with heart disease. Mary continued on with her work but decided it was time for a change of scenery. She moved out of the home she shared with her family for over 25 years. During the move, she came across a small forgotten valise filled with many of the poems she had written over the years. Among all this was a lost copy of Footprints in the Sand that she hadn't seen since moving into the house in 1959. 1984, while cleaning out the garage to prepare to move from her house. In a small suitcase, among her other poems, she rediscovered a very old handwritten copy that she thought was lost. It was one of the copies Mary had made and dated 1939. Just 3 years after she wrote the original. Later that year, the U.S. Copyright Office awarded her a copyright for Footprints in the Sand 48 years after it was written. It was another 11 years before her handwritten copy was authenticated by a forensic specialist as to its age. Many others have tried to falsely claim authorship, but none can show significant proof such as this. She decided to pursue her claim to authorship and later in the year was awarded a copyright for her poem. In 1987, 11 years later, her 1939 copy of Footprints in the Sand was authenticated as genuine by a forensic specialist and said to be approximately 50+ years old. This would predate any claims made by others of authorship, including Margaret Fishback Powers, who is said to have written it 1964. Mary worked for many years to gain recognition for creating footprints in the sand, which has continued, and none can show significant proof such as this. The first time I ever wrote the Footprints in the Sand poem, I can remember the very last line. It is the Lord was whispering it right to me. Mary Stevenson.
Last night I had a dream. I dreamed I was walking along the beach to the Lord, and across the sky flashed scenes from my life. And for each scene, I noticed two sets of footprints in the sand. One belonged to me, and the other to the Lord. And after the last scene of my life flashed before me, I looked back at the footprints in the sand, and I noticed that many times along the path of my life, especially at the very lowest and saddest times, there was only one set of footprints. Footprints in the sand, he held me in his hand. Someday I'll understand. Footprints in the sand. Now this really troubled me, so I asked the Lord about it. Lord, you said once I decided to follow you, you'd walk with me all the way. But I noticed that during the saddest and lowest times of my life, there was only one set of footprints. And I don't understand why, when I needed you the most, you would leave me. And the Lord replied, my son, my precious child, I love you, and I would never leave you. During your times of suffering, when you could see only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. Footprints in the sand, he held me in his hand. He gave me strength to face the coming day. When times I felt alone, I was never on my own. Someday I'll understand.